Right, I'm going to get going. Guys, on the last webinar that I had, I ran through a couple of points on what you should look out for, how to choose an appropriate trainer. I ran through the definition of a trainer. I took a lot of questions towards the end. I stuck to the time, which was a 40-minute lecture. I like to try and stick to the time for my lectures. That way, obviously, we're sticking to a preset program. I spoke about a trainer having notes and making sure that they have proper lesson plans, which is extremely important. As I do this evening, I'll hold it up for you. Here's my lesson plan this evening. As you can see, I'm a mind mapper. I operate with mind maps because most training cannot be presented in a linear format. I mentioned that very briefly on the last webinar about using good quality training material and the good attributes or the attributes that a trainer needs to be able to present the type of subjects that I present or people like myself present here in South Africa. I also said that we had various types of training. I didn't delve too much into the training, which is what I'm going to do this evening. So tonight's topic is choosing the correct course or choosing the correct syllabus to attend. Why is this important? Well, right from the outset, I need to state my objectives for this evening, and it should be the same as you guys. The objectives for this evening is that I'm able to impart some information about the various types of courses that are on offer by various trainers, including myself, as well as others. There are some good trainers in South Africa. The method of delivery of those courses, course content, and I'm going to divide it in half, that the objectives cover not only unit standard-based training, as well as non-unit standard-based training, and that's very important for you guys to understand. Course outcomes. Now, outcomes are measurable, and you'll hear me talk about this on this webinar. The outcomes which are measurable for this evening's chat is the following. And if you've got a pen and paper handy, like I said last week, if you've got a pen and paper handy, I want you to write down the following acronym, the word SMART, spelled S-M-A-R-T, SMART. Just write it down somewhere. By the end of this webinar, I want you to be able to understand what the SMART, the acronym SMART means, as well as the following. Number one, training must be relevant. I did discuss this very briefly on the first webinar. 2, training must be current. And 3, training needs to be cost effective. So at the end of this webinar, we will rehash those outcomes which I've stated there. Is everybody in agreement to that? Just give me a thumbs up if you want to. You can turn your mutes off because in the background, you might hear a toilet flushing, and that might be an embarrassing thing for you to have. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by saying I would like you to have 2 circles drawn on your piece of paper. On the circle on the left, all I would like you to do is I'd like you to have the heading Unit Standard Based Training. Circle on the right, non-unit standard based training. And our topic this evening is obviously choosing a course. Now, this is an extremely important topic to cover because a lot of people don't know the difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all run through the acronym SMART and explain to you what that acronym means, and you need to apply to any training, whether you're going on a course that's work related or doesn't have to be this specific topic, it can be any topic, but it is an important acronym. The first letter, S, stands for specific. Your training needs to be specific to your needs. In this day and age, like I said on the first webinar, disposable income is not available as it was prior to COVID-19, and times are becoming harder. So you need to know where you want to spend your hard-earned cash in terms of what you're wanting to attend. M stands for measurable. Any training that you've attended needs to be measurable. What I mean by measurable is that there must be outcomes met. And you will see that as I go through this over the next 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, you'll see I'll be talking about measurable. A stands for achievable. You must be able to achieve the outcomes. Now, what that means is when we talk about unit standard-based training and non-unit standard-based training, do you have the prerequisites to attend the course to which you would like to enter or attend? R stands for relevant. Must be relevant to your topic, your needs. And T stands for time bound. In other words, there must be time attached to it. How long will it take for me to attain this specific course or the information on this course? So I'm going to go under the first topic on the circle on the left where you wrote down unit standard-based training. I'm going to run through a couple of things. First of all, unit standard-based training is controlled by the Department of Education. It's controlled by what we refer to as a SETA. SETA is an acronym for Sector Education Training Authority. When you attend a course, for example, your legal lecture that you attended to obtain a handgun license, that was one unit standard, which forms a building block for which you are going to travel on a journey and build a number of these courses in your genre so that you can submit them for a formal qualification. So the unit standards or the courses that you attend, which are unit standard based, with someone like Ridwan, who's just joined us now. Thanks, Rids, for coming in. Form building blocks to be able to get you towards a formal qualification in a specific field. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, it's important for you to apply for certain firearm licenses. You will require certain unit standards. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had difficulty in going to apply for, let's say, a shotgun license. And you've gone and done the legal subject and you've done use of handgun, but you don't have the unit standard use of shotgun. I'm sure some of you have been in this situation before. And you've had to go seek training to obtain a qualification, unit use of shotgun, so that you can apply for the license. So this is exactly what I'm talking about now. These are unit standards. So unit standards or courses that are attended, which are unit standard based, form part of a qualification. On their own, they are a separate unit standard. This training can only be presented by a registered service provider. So in other words, a person who's registered with a specific SETA, a controlling body, to be able to provide that training. These unit standard courses that you attend are referred to as formalized qualifications. In other words, they are recognized as a formal qualification. It's the same as if you were attending a theoretical component that has a unit standard that can be utilized in your place of work. For example, if you work in a municipality attending a course referred to as assertive communication, there'll be a unit standard number attached to it and it forms part of a full qualification. What's important to know about these unit standard courses that you attend with a registered service provider is that they can be used should you wish to apply for a position or seeking a position in an employment sector that requires you to have these to perform those functions. So for example, if you are wanting to work in a security practitioner or a security field, you would need a certain number of unit standards to be able to work in that area. What you need to know about these unit standards is they form a foundation, a baseline on which you build your skills, not only for certification for firearms, but also a foundation for which you can have formalized qualifications. Now, what you need to understand about these unit standards is that they are set as the bare minimum for you to obtain a firearm license or for you to have access and use and transport a firearm within the Republic of South Africa. I say again, they are the bare standards, the bare bottom line standards that are accepted for you to use. I hope that this little discussion about the unit standards has clarified a couple of things with you guys in terms of why we have to attend them and how they can help you. What you need to know as well about these unit standards, in addition to what I've said, is that these unit standards, as I said, are presented by someone who is registered as a service provider. To be registered as a service provider, the training has to be done in an accredited shooting range by an accredited trainer. The assessments have to be conducted by an accredited assessor, and the documentation that the assessor uses needs to be registered with that specific seater for them to use. So there are lots of checks and balances in place. We in the industry, sometimes we refer to this training as tick the box training, because you're attending a course merely to tick the box so that you can move on to something greater. What I would like to say is, openly on this forum, is that these are important. These courses are important. They are very important. They enable you to apply for additional firearm licenses. They give you a good foundation and a good baseline to form your genre in terms of expanding your knowledge. And if presented by somebody who really enjoys presenting these courses, they can be beneficial to you. Now I'd like you to look at the circle that you've drawn on the right-hand side of your sheets of paper, and it says there non-unit standard-based training. Non-unit standard-based training is generally presented by somebody, or when I say somebody, someone, for example, a range officer, a martial arts instructor, an ex-sport shooter, somebody who's currently participating in sports and possibly representing a province or the country, or possibly even an ex-military or police instructor. They're referred to as practitioners in their field of expertise. When we talk about non-unit standard-based training, we are talking about a group of individuals like myself who have specific skills, who choose not to present unit standard-based training or present it over and above unit standard-based training. The course content is usually based upon the trainer's area of expertise and where they like to present, or where they would prefer to present their material. This material is generally their subject matter where they specialize in. These courses can be well structured, can be well presented. However, you must be careful. There are trainers out there who do not have well presented material and well structured material. We'll discuss that towards the end when I start working back and forth between the two. Course content is usually 9 times out of 10 higher than the exit level of the unit standard-based training. Now, what I mean by that is that you could go on a course use of shotgun, and it will give you, like I said earlier, the bare essentials required by law. It might not be sufficient for you, and therefore you seek training, additional training presented by a non-unit standard-based training provider. And I'm going to refer to that person as a non-unit standard-based training provider, because there are a number of us in South Africa. Usually when you attend these courses that are non-unit standard-based, they are presented in such a manner that there is no form of exit assessment. So in other words, on unit standard-based training, you would have to perform specific drills in front of the assessor for you to obtain a certificate. On non-unit standard-based training, there's no form of actual assessment. This brings me to the next point. Certificates issued by a non-unit standard-based trainer will usually have the wording course attended. Certificates which are issued by a service provider will say you have been deemed competent. And those two mean two totally different things. And I'll discuss it in depth a little bit later on.
Sorry, Dean, can you just go back? That was the CETA one was you attended the course, and the second one for non was deemed competent.
No, I'll rehash it for you, Dave. When you attend a unit standard-based course, once you've been deemed competent and you're successful in being able to meet the requirements of the outcomes, then what will happen is you'll be issued a certificate of competency in terms of you have been deemed competent. When you attend a course with someone who's providing non-unit standard-based training, you'll find the certificate will probably read in attendance. You attended a specific course. I would like to draw your attention to the, no worries, Dave, 100%. I'd like to draw your attention to the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of the acronym SMART. You've all written it down, what it is. S stands for specific, M is measurable, A is achievable, R is relevant, T is time-bound. They are very closely related to the three pillars that someone like Ridwan and I would use in terms of EDTP, which is Education, Training and Development Practitioner. And what we do is we would say that, first of all, training must be relevant to the person that's attending the course. I'm not just selling you a course because I'm going to make money from you. I'm going to sell you a course because you actually, there's a need for you to be attending the training that I'm presenting. So it must be relevant. Training must be current. I spoke about this in terms of a trainer last time on the last webinar. And I said that training must be current. The trainer himself or herself needs to upskill themselves regularly so that the training being provided is current. And I'm going to discuss back and forth just now this topic of currency. The third point is that it needs to be cost effective. For it to be cost effective, it needs to be time bound, which is what I've spoken about there in terms of the acronym SMART. Time bound, time is money. The number of rounds that you're going to fire on the shooting range means money. So now that I've got you to write down the acronym SMART, you've written down the 3 points of outcomes being training is relevant, must be current, and cost effectiveness. I'm going to now start bouncing between the two. Can I go ahead? Give me a thumbs up.
Sorry, Dean, if I can just ask for clarity on one aspect.
Go ahead, Mr. G.
Thank you. So with reference to the non-unit standard-based course attendance versus the unit standard aligned accredited provider giving a certification of competency, could you expand on the exposures and responsibilities attendant with that certificate, where, for instance, an accredited provider has to demonstrate how he or she awarded that competency in the case of a query, whereas a course attendance doesn't carry nearly as much onus?
Okay, I will cover that. Just to answer Mr. G's question, number one, for you to attend a unit standard-based course, the assessor, the facilitator and assessor, who might be one and the same person, will need you to attend a certain amount of time spent in contact with that trainer. Those are referred to as notional hours. And I did discuss this very briefly last webinar. The notional hours is the number of hours or the amount of time that it would take an average person to achieve a specific skill. That's the first thing I need to clarify to answer your question, Mr. G. Now, once you've attended the prerequisite number of hours, both in contact session and at home doing homework, you will then present yourself at a predetermined time to the assessor and you'll agree to undergo your assessment. Once you've attended that assessment and you've been deemed competent or not yet competent, then you will go on to the next stage where then you are presented with a certificate of proficiency. And I'm going to use the word proficiency, not competency, so that we can just clarify something in terms of firearm licensing. So that you are proficient in the law and the use of a handgun, or you're proficient in the law and the use of a shotgun, or proficient in the law and use of self-loading rifle, for etc. With non-unit standard-based training, the person, the presenter that's presenting, or the trainer or the practitioner that's presenting that training material, if they are well versed in education, training and development, they will be able to calculate how long it would take for an average person to achieve the skills of that person attending and leaving at the end of the day. Which is why we find that a lot of trainers like myself and Ridwan, who present non-unit standard-based training as well as unit standard-based training, will calculate out that we operate our courses in a modular format. so as not to overload you with too much information in a single day and you are not able to grasp the concepts by the time you leave. Bringing me back to the method of facilitation that good trainers use, which is the EDRP method of facilitation: an explanation, realistic time-lapse demonstration, imitation by the person who's attending the course to the point of where they are able to perform what is being required of them, and then they depart the course where they then need to practice that skill on their own. Does that answer your question, Mr. G?
Yes, sir, thank you. My understanding in the generic environment rather than specific firearm with attached legislation is that the issuer of a certificate of competence has greater accountability for the conduct and ability of the practitioner in the in-field environment than somebody who just says, yes, they attended my course. I did not assess whether they had comprehension, retention, and application skills, but thank you, yes.
Absolutely 100% correct, Mr. G. And that is because of the assessment and moderation process. It carries a lot more validity. Right, so let me start moving between the two circles drawn on the piece of paper in front of you. The first one that I would like to draw reference to is the method in terms of the facilitation that's presented. Some practitioners that are non-unit standard-based trainers will draw up very good training material and present it very well. Those trainers are very innovative, and this is what I discussed on the previous webinar. They're innovative in terms of they go out there, they know what the unit standard requires, and they will peg their training at a higher level above a unit standard. What's important to make note here is that, like I said earlier, the unit standard is the bare minimum required by legislation in South Africa. In fact, good quality training that's unit standard based encourages people to continue their training path and attend non-unit standard based courses, knowing that that is the bare basic minimum that is a requirement in terms of legislation. Do you guys get that point? Give me a thumbs up if you got that point, or if you would like me to say it again. I would also like to say that in terms of an assessment being conducted by an assessor, the assessor himself or herself, in terms of a unit standard based course, needs to ensure that formative and summative assessments are conducted correctly. That is extremely important. Now, when I talk about formative and summative assessments, I'm referring to a formative assessment as a pre-match to the final match. In other words, we're giving the learner an opportunity to be able to go through the learning process and assess themselves either by means of peer assessment by other students on the course or themselves against their observation checklist, and ensure that they're able to meet the assessment criteria for an outcome prior to going for a summative assessment. So the formative assessment is a means to check to ensure that you know your work prior to sitting a summative assessment, which is your final assessment. Does that make sense to you guys? What I would like to say is this, is that on the previous webinar, I spoke about trainers and I spoke about instructors. And if you remember, I spoke about an instructor, a person who imparts a practical skill, correct? Then I spoke about a facilitator, a person who merely assists you to obtain a measurable outcome. And then I spoke about a coach who's a person who guides you through the process of becoming better at what you do based upon their experience in that specific field. For you to work as a unit standard based instructor in South Africa, you can attend a course where they will certify you as a firearms instructor, in the field of firearms I'm referring to now, and an assessor, and that will be done in the space of 1 to 2 weeks. And then you are given a license to go out and train people based upon structured material. Those trainers we refer to in the industry as copy and paste trainers. And I mentioned this on the last webinar, if you remember. Why I'm bringing this up is that there are some very good instructors in South Africa, or trainers, or coaches, or whatever you'd like to give them, or practitioner, whatever name you'd like to attach to them in South Africa, that understand that this process is important. However, the standards at which these assessments are being conducted are being watered down and are not being upheld. And over and above that, these trainers or practitioners feel that there's higher standards that they can take students to or learners to, which are not covered in the training material of the unit standards that are being presented. So I'm saying that you do need to be aware that there are unit standard courses that need to be attended. I encourage you to attend them, but also seek training that's not unit standard based training that can take you to a high level. Are there any questions thus far before I go any further?
Sorry, Dean, you referred to the previous webinar. Is it possible to get a copy of that? Unfortunately, I couldn't make that one.
Dave, if you go onto my YouTube, it's on the YouTube, FUNDIKHONO's YouTube account. You can check it out there.
Thank you.
What I would like to say is this, is that in South Africa, there are a number of good trainers who present both unit standard and non-unit standard based training. I would certainly urge you to do your research. Now, what controls the trainers for unit standard based training, which was discussed last webinar, is this. They need to be registered as a service provider, and there are records kept of all the registered service providers and trainers in South Africa, which are available for you to peruse online. On the flip side of the coin, on the non-unit standard based training side, there are a number of trainers out there. It would do you a lot of good to research them and to see and check out in different forums to see who you would like to attend training with and what type of training they present and what their area of expertise is. Like I said to you, there are many practitioners out there that present training. There are some martial artists that are out there that have now turned trainers that are presenting training. And you'll find that a martial artist will present something that's possibly more physically based than the use of firearms. You might find sport shooters that are presenting courses out there, and ex-police and military personnel that are presenting courses out there. Just be careful that the training that you are seeking is an area in which they have expertise in. Like I said to you on the first webinar, remember that one of the key components of a good trainer is being able to navigate through being an instructor, a teacher, a coach, and a facilitator to be able to present material to adults that are attending training, especially in the field in which we are talking about here, and that's the use of force. The other important key component here is that is the trainer or has the trainer had to ever go and give evidence and lead evidence in a court of law? And I'm not just talking about a regional court, I'm talking about the High Court where use of force has been used and actions need to be explained. So these are things to take into consideration. With regards to non-unit standard-based training, what you got to look out for as well is the course content. The person who's presenting the course, do they have a structured modular type approach to presenting the material? Or do they come up with a fancy name for a course and the next minute we've got beat 'em up, shoot 'em up course being offered? And when you look at the course content, it's just a mumbo jumbo approach to their methods of how they want to present something to earn a little bit of extra cash. We've seen those around, and I'm sure Rids will agree with me with that. So I'm going to open the floor. I'd like you guys to ask me some questions based upon what I've just said. Mr. G, fire away if you've got questions. Anyone got any questions, please ask.
So if you could possibly comment.
Sorry, Dean, this
Okay, I'm going to go with Mr. G first, and I'm going to come to you, Dave.
Dean, sorry, feedback on this end. You've touched basically on learning assumed to be in place. You've also alluded to progressive development in terms of what would essentially be level 1, level 2, level 3. But in the context of learning assumed to be in place and recognition of prior learning, the change in the order, for instance, me being the black sheep of the family, I started at level 2, and after my 3rd or 4th course, I then did level 1, which had value, massive value, but it was non-sequential. Where should the sequence be broken or where shouldn't it be broken would hopefully be of value to the others as well. Thank you.
Mr. G, that happens quite often. Ridwan, who's on tonight, sitting here, as well as Steve, will attest to this. That's also here this evening. When we advertise a course as a non-unit standard-based trainer, we assume, and yes, I know the definition of assumption, but we assume that a person has attended a unit standard-based course with a reputable service provider and has exited that course having done their assessments correctly. Where they need to start is they need to start, yes, at grass or the bare basics. Unfortunately, when trainers like myself advertise a course, handgun owners operators course, most people don't want to start there. What they'll see is they'll see a course being advertised where I'm doing some form of urban movement or I'm teaching vehicle counter ambush drills, and they'll want to jump onto that course, but they don't have the abilities to attend that course. So it is crucial that people look at themselves, and that's why they say training needs to be relevant. Yes, I understand that we all want to move within an urban environment around our home safely with a firearm, but there are building blocks to get there. And it's important that when you look at the course content that's being advertised by the trainer, and yes, we don't give away everything when we advertise our courses, we'll give a skeletonized structure. You need to look at that and make sure that it is relevant to your needs to travel upon a path to get to the level of being able to work within an urban environment or in and around a vehicle. Dave?
Yeah, it was similar to what Mr. D said. It's just that, like, for instance, now you want to do a vehicle course. Is it not sort of in the best interest for the instructor to ask the people? Because if I come on that course and I've never done that, surely I'm going to pull everybody down. You know, sometimes you attend courses and you get guys that are keen and wanting to do it, but then you get some guy who's never done it and has no experience. So everybody gets delayed getting to the point.
Dave, I can concur with you in that some of the courses that are presented, Rids will bear me out, as well as Steve, we try and screen as many people as possible and say to them, listen, this type of course requires you to have a certain level of understanding or use of your firearm or firearms. It also requires you to have certain pieces of kit or equipment in place prior to attending it and understanding how that equipment works. And we get feedback saying, yes, I've been in the shooting fraternity for a while. I've attended a couple of shoots and I'm good to go. When the person arrives at the shooting range, we've possibly never met before. We arrive at the shooting range early. I meet with everybody, and straight away I can see that the person is not at the level at which they need to be at. I usually take that person aside and I say to them, listen, you can stay. There's certain drills that you can participate in and some you're not going to be allowed to participate in. They're still going to be paying the same price because they're taking up a place on the shooting range. They've got to pay for groundsman fees, shooting range, the equipment, etc., and time, and we allow them to participate. And that's why you'll find that when I run my courses, I have a number of trainers working with me on the range, and I'm sure you can all attest to that, that I have additional staff on the range. And I might assign that person or persons in a trainer that trainer watches them solely to ensure that they can at least enjoy some of the training. A lot of those people leave the course and come back to me and will inbox me or phone me and say, I was well out of my depth. I need to dial it back 2 courses. Where do I start? But it takes that for them to realize that. But when you try and sell them that first course, that handgun owners operators course or an intermediate handgun course, they don't want to attend. They feel that they're above that level. Steve, you want to say something? I see your lights coming on there. You want to talk?
Can do if you want. To kind of link the two perhaps, especially with the current situation, sometimes while it is better to progress from basic through to the more advanced courses, perhaps these days opportunities may be limited and something may come up out of sequence, as mentioned. If you're honest with yourself and your abilities and you're smart about your approach, it is possible to attend out of sequence, if you will, but it is important to go back and revisit the more basic courses that you've missed when opportunity presents. And I would also advise that when the advanced course that you previously attended without the basics comes up again, that you re-attend that now that you've put in a more solid foundation. So it is possible to run out of sequence, but the best way to get the most mileage out of that is to be honest with yourself and realize you're attending out of sequence and work accordingly.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. What we also find is that we find that I get a lot of guys coming and training with me who possibly participate in sport. And this evening we've got Manar with us. How's it there, bud? Manar's a very, very good sport shooter, and he shoots a lot of sports and he does very well. And we get the guys that come across from the sporting arena and come and participate on these programs, which is excellent. I encourage that. As I encourage people who come and train with me, I encourage you to join a club. You need to participate in some club shoots. It's nice being able to participate in club shoots because what it does is it puts you on the line, it puts you under pressure. You get that elevated heart rate. You are standing on the line. There's a couple of people watching you. And boy, oh boy, when that pro timer goes, you got to show people what you can do. And that's where it tests your ability in terms of being able to operate under a little bit of external pressure. So I believe that joining a club, getting involved with club shooting is very important. But just understand that club shooting is exactly what it is. It is sport shooting. And although it's very good, there are some negatives to sport shooting which have an adverse effect on real world training. So just understand that. But I do urge you to join a shooting club, a reputable shooting club, and go and participate in sport shooting. It doesn't only open avenues for additional firearm licenses. What it does is it puts you into contact with other like-minded individuals, and it does help you to hone the skills that you learn on courses that you attend with people like myself and other trainers. So I do need to say that. Are there any questions with regards? Sorry, are there any questions with regards to what I've discussed thus far? Anybody want to bring anything up?
Sorry, Dean.
Yes, Mohammed, go ahead.
So I just got a call in between, so I'm not sure if this question was asked or not. Obviously, it's a newbie question as well. In regard with the different courses, you did mention obviously there's certain equipment and stuff that would need to be carried, and even with previous training and stuff that's required. Would you have a list of that is required for a course or for a specific course, or do trainers in general, do they list what is required or equipment required or previous training required to actually attend a specific course?
Okay, Mohammed, just to clarify here, prior to people coming on course with me, what I usually do is I send out a generic WhatsApp message to the group of people that are wanting to attend. And what I will do is I will identify that you need to be, obviously, you've got to be operating with a good quality firearm. If it's a firearm related course, you need to ensure that you have a good quality holster, a good quality belt, good quality magazine carrier. If you're going to choose to use it, if you're going to put the magazine in your pocket, that's fine by me. I don't mind that. If you're coming on a low to no light type course where we're operating, where we're transitioning from day to night, then I would require you to bring at least one good quality flashlight. I will be having a webinar on equipment. It's coming up soon. I will let you guys know, and I'll run through the equipment required to train with someone like myself, not only in the use of handguns, but all the other facets in which we teach. But yes, good quality equipment, as well as the knowledge of how that equipment works. It's no good coming on course if you're going to attend a low to no light course. It means you're only opening the box and taking the flashlight out for the first time at the shooting range. You might be in for quite a rough ride at the range, and I'm sure there's other guys here that will attest to that have trained with me.
I have a question for you, Dean.
Go ahead.
You briefly mentioned about the trainer or the coach must be able to stand in a court of law. Can you please explain that? The reason I'm asking that is, you know, I'm involved in the canine handler arena with potentially dangerous animals. Same as when you carry for self-defense, I would assume.
Okay, Marinda, good question. Just something that I'd like to mention is that I will be doing a webinar on the use of force, on the force continuum, which is, you're going to need to be there for that, because I will cover this specific topic. But to answer your question, a reputable trainer should be able to stand by the skill set, be it theoretical or practical, when one of his students use those skills out in the real world. I have been called as an expert witness to court to be able to present evidence on training techniques or methods that I have taught. Now, what I mean by that is this is a two-edged blade, a double-edged blade. You can imagine a dagger, it's got a sharp edge on either side, which we'll talk about in one of our other webinars on edged weapons. You must be very careful that if you do call a trainer, that they attend court and they present the evidence which is specific to the need of your legal representative. And what I mean by that is that if you have stepped out the bounds of the training that was provided by that trainer will come and tell the court exactly the type of training, to which level of training you received, and the techniques that you were taught. I don't want to get into specifics and names in that, but there was a dog handler in the police that had a small oopsie, and the dog bit an individual that was not a suspect. The trainer was summoned to court, and unfortunately the evidence led by the trainer resulted in the dog handler that obviously had this oopsie with their dog, being charged and having to pay quite a high penalty and fine, when they were hoping that the trainer was going to be able to help them out. But the evidence led by the trainer was not of such. It was basically exactly what the trainer had taught. So you've got to be very careful with that if you are going to use a trainer. We all know that the attorney that I choose, that I use, and a lot of others use for the use of force in South Africa is Mr. Jacques Botha. And if you're using Mr. Jacques Botha, he will know exactly when to call a trainer to give evidence. And that evidence that is led by the trainer is only evidence led by the trainer for that specific training. And that's it. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it does to an extent.
Are there any other questions there, guys? Kurt, you're very quiet, eh? Are you still awake?
Dean, Stephen here.
Yes.
Just one thing to add on one question prior in terms of quality equipment. Just to add one thing to that, we know, I can see the smile. That is a whole webinar in itself. But perhaps a important point to make to the audience is when you refer to quality equipment, you also mean quality equipment that is relevant to the task at hand and the desired outcomes. A quality piece of equipment for perhaps a sporting task or a military task may not be relevant to a civilian task, for example. It would still be quality equipment, but not relevant to the task that you have in mind for your desired outcome.
Thanks, Steve. That is correct. Like Steve says, this is another whole webinar on its own in terms of equipment. He's quite correct in saying that, in that I always advocate that if you're going to come and train with me, be it empty hand, be it an impact weapon, edge weapon, oleoresin capsicum, and ECW or firearms, you need to be suitably attired for the task at hand, and you need to be suitably equipped. And it needs to be equipped in such a way that you're going to be carrying it like that on the day, hopefully never, but the day that you have to use it. I often see guys will pitch up at the shooting range, and they might come from a sporting background, and they're used to that. They'll get to the shooting range, and if you're shooting RPSC, they'll take off their carry rig and they'll put on an RPSC rig with the CR Speed holster and mag pouches. I'm sure Manar's seen this. And then what will happen is they'll go and shoot an RPSC match. They may be using an STI if they've got the bucks. And when they leave, they put a 38 special and a floppy Kadira holster in their waistband and leave and travel home. To me, that doesn't make sense. And that's one of the reasons why I stopped shooting RPSC. And I dabbled a little bit in IDPA. I didn't do very well, but I shot a bit of IDPA because it was more realistic in terms of the carry, the rules that force you to carry in a specific way. And also realistic type firearms that are being used. So your equipment definitely needs to meet the requirements that you need them for. A couple of years ago, I remember running some courses, and I had some people from out of town. I won't mention who they are, but they would pitch up decked out in the latest camouflage attire, and they would have body armor on and tactical thigh rigs and all that. And then when I interview them, I find that the guy's a doctor. To me, that doesn't really make sense. If you're a doctor and you're decked out in the latest tactical gear, you should actually be pitching up there in a pair of jeans with your fireman, and inside the waistband holster and the magazine in your back pocket with a flashlight, and attend the course. You'd actually learn a lot more, and learn from having to get and find the magazine and having to put the gun away one-handed. You guys that have trained with me know that I'm big on being able to carry a firearm with a light on it. The importance of drawing it is just as important as being able to put it back in the holster when you transition to a different level of force. So yes, absolutely correct, Steve. One of the other things I'd like to say is this: in unit standard-based training, very seldom, okay, it's referred to in unit standard-based training, and Rids will hear me out here. In unit standard-based training, it's called critical cross-field outcomes. That's where we start putting things together. so that you are able to understand that there's a bigger picture to the training that you're undergoing or receiving. On non-unit standard-based training and critical cross-field outcomes, some of you might have remembered me running courses where I include some form of physicality to the actual use of a firearm. So in other words, you're not going to be standing on a shooting range at a given time based upon events unfolding in front of you. You're going to hear a whistle or you're going to hear the command to fire the gun. You would first have to get involved in some form of physicality. In other words, it was a tussle or a pull and push and a shove, and the next minute you're having to fight physically to be able to earn the right to be able to draw your firearm to defend yourself. That is what we refer to as critical cross-field outcomes, being able to join a couple of bits and pieces together for you to be able to participate in an event like that. So yes, very important that you understand that in non-unit standard-based training, trainers, we try and strive for getting to the point where we are not just standing on a square range and doing square range drills, square range training. We infringe upon a lot of those range regulations in terms of being able to shoot various angles, and that obviously with safety still being the most important thing on the shooting range. So Rids, I see your hand up. You got a question or you want to elaborate on something?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Good evening, everybody. Dean, if I could maybe share a little bit of the education as well as my opinion when it comes to training, and what to look for in a good trainer and what to look for in a good course. So,
go ahead.
All training, whether it's done via unit standard or non-unit standard based intervention, one of the most important things that a trainer would look for and expect the learner to produce is evidence. So when it comes to evidence, from what I've been taught over the years, we come to the acronym known as VARCS, V-A-R-C-N-S. And what it means is that evidence should be valid, authentic. There's a play on the A. It can be either authentic or accurate. The R stands for reliable. The C stands for current, and the S stands for sufficient. If evidence emanating from a training intervention do not meet these principles, then we got to stop and do an assessment and find out where are we lacking. Okay, I also want to mention that training has changed considerably from the old-fashioned system, and today we should be using the OBE, outcomes-based education system. And it doesn't really matter what type of training, whether it be accredited or not accredited, but we've come a long way from the old system and the old ways of training people. And there's a few things that I look for that I find is necessary to satisfy in an outcomes-based education environment. And that's one, obviously, the outcomes. Are the outcomes clear? Are they measurable? The assessment tools. Are the assessment tools that are being used, are they fair? Are they relevant for the training that takes place? Quality. Is there a certain level or standard of quality maintained from the beginning right up until the end of that training? And we've got to look at the dynamics of the learner or the course itself. Is it adult learning that we are providing? If it is, then I need to tailor everything that I do to cater for adults. Adults learn in a different way. For example, children would learn in a different way. As well as the way that you communicate with different people based on the course dynamics will be different. You might find yourself training a tier 2, tier 1 group of people, and you would find with them you can throw jargon at them. They understand it. But a newcomer to all of this may not understand a lot of the jargon. And you may need to use simple terminology to get them to understand what you are talking about, to introduce concepts, and to build their skill level. And then to get to the last part, what to also expect on course. I know you touched on it, or you spoke quite a bit about it. It's structure. Is there a decent structure to this course? Or does it seem like we come to module 4, but module 4 should have actually been module 1, for example? Breaks. Are there sufficient breaks during the training? We all know that adults do not learn at the same pace as children do. 1. Number 2, certain types of training material cannot be absorbed at the same rate as others can be. Things change. So those things need to be suited to cater for all of that. Terminology used, is it relevant to what we are teaching? The trainer, is the trainer giving credit to sources of information and concepts? Not everybody can invent everything. Something has come from somewhere, and you need to give credit to those people. Humility. Once again, not everybody knows everything, and a trainer needs to have a certain level of professionalism, but he or she also needs to be humble enough to accept that I don't know everything, and learners that attend may have previous skills, knowledge, and learning that they've gone through, or they may even have experiential learning that we need to consider. And those are the things that I look for. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Thanks, Rids. That was important information given out there. One of the things that I used to look for when I was attending courses going back to the 80s and 90s was that I would ask for course outline. I'm referring to non-unit standard-based training, because back then we didn't have unit standard-based training. It was prior to the unit standard-based training. We were looking at that direction, and only in 98, 99 did we start with unit standard-based training when I was the chairman of the POSLEX heater for the use of firearms. Now, when you look at courses back then, there was no unit standard-based training. So we would look at course content, we'd do a bit of research about the trainer, find out what kind of training that they were offering. For example, there was a South African trainer that now lives in Chicago. He trains for the Chicago Police Department. His name was Henk Iverson. He used to run a couple of courses around South Africa. He was an ex-police reaction unit member from Port Elizabeth. But he had traveled to the US on a number of occasions. It was his livelihood. He traveled all over, and he required all these skills, and he used to run courses here in South Africa. Very good trainer. Unfortunately, he left, and he's now living in Chicago, training the Chicago Police Department. But a very good trainer, and I would urge you to do the same. There are other trainers out there that offer good quality training, and I'd urge you to go and explore those. But just check to see what kind of quality training they're presenting. I wouldn't just be spending money with anybody. Are there any other questions out there? I just want to let you know that my lecture, I started and stopped my stopwatch. It was 40 minutes. We've obviously gone over that with a couple of questions that have been asked. Some good questions coming out there. Any other questions that you'd like to ask, guys?
Sorry, Dean, can I just ask Ridwan to go through the VARs again, please? I've got half of it down.
Absolutely. Rids?
No problem. So it's VA of Victor, Alpha, Romeo, Charlie, and Sierra. The V stands for valid. The A stands for either authentic or accurate. The R stands for reliable. The C stands for current. And the S stands for sufficient.
Thank you.
Dave, where this comes into play is that you'll find people like myself and Ridwan who are trained as education, training, and development practitioners. We often get people coming to us and saying, I haven't done any formalized training. I was in the military for 4 years. I used the following firearms. I did some beat 'em up, kick 'em up type course, and I'd like to have formalized qualifications. They would present themselves to someone like Ridwan and I, who are RPL advisors. The acronym RPL stands for Recognition of Prior Learning. That acronym that Ridwan has given you is what we use to obtain evidence so that we can measure that against the outcomes of the unit standards for which they are requiring formalized qualifications. Does that make sense so far, Dave?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, what we would then do is we check the evidence. That evidence can be in the form of, for example, they participate at shooting events regularly. So they might have trophies, they might have a certificate in terms of the currency and relevancy that we are looking for. We can also look at various and past work records in terms of the issuing of firearms, etc. And or other courses attended, for example, if they've attended legalized type training in that. And what we do is we take this evidence and we measure it against the specific outcomes of a unit standard or unit standards, and then make application based upon them meeting the necessary or required criteria for them to obtain that formalized qualification. Now, what I would like to say is that a number of you have trained with me, and I think Ritz has been on one or two of the courses where you might have interacted with him. But the courses that I present are modular based, they're well structured, and they do have outcomes. You can take those certificates that I've issued you and present them to someone like Ridwan, and he can measure those against other qualifications that you might not know even exist. Yes, there might be shortfalls in that specific outcome where he can measure you or assess you or arrange for assessments to take place, and you can apply for those qualifications. Do you guys understand what I've just said, or you would like me to go through it again? Thanks, Mohammed. So, just to recap, training can be by means of formalized training as in unit standard based, and there can be unit standard based training and non-unit standard based training. I'd also like to bring a point up here as well, is that training can be informal. For example, this webinar this evening is an informal means of training. I think you guys might have learned a bit tonight just listening to both myself and Ridwan, but with Steve there giving his input there, you might have picked up some pieces there that might help you in the future. So training can be formal or informal. It can be unit standard based and non-unit standard based training. I'll give you an example of informal training. How many of you go to gun shops regularly and potter around in gun shops? I know Greg is smiling there. He spends a lot of time in gun shops. You go into a gun shop, you pick up a specific firearm, and you work with that firearm inside the gun shop. And you put it down and you go back a couple of days later because you're thinking eventually you've learned how to use that specific. That's an informal means of learning. Informal can also be at the shooting range where you with your mates and they show you a new weapon and you get to use it a couple of times at the shooting range. It's informal. So informal training is just as good as formalized training, and it can be assessed. What I would like to say is that the courses that are presented by non-unit standard trainers or practitioners, if I can just recap, they need to be structured, they need to be well presented, there needs to be objectives, there needs to be outcomes. And when you leave there, you do need to know that that trainer, if they're a good trainer, they would have given you all the pieces of the puzzle, and by the time you leave there, they would have used the EDRP method, or they should have used the EDRP method of being able to get the message across, and that they're expecting you to go and practice the techniques that you taught. A couple of things you need to make a note of there is the facilities that you're going to use to practice the techniques that are taught by people like myself. A lot of the shooting ranges are very strict in terms of range rules. They will not allow certain movements on the shooting range unless overseen by a qualified range officer or safety officer or an instructor that's assigned to that shooting range. So you just got to make sure that all your checks and balances in place. You'd hate to go to a shooting range and start movement like we run on these courses under a very controlled environment and then find yourself in some hot water with that specific facility. Are there any questions anyone would like to ask, or can we start wrapping this up? Vanna, have you got anything to say? I see you sitting very quietly. You haven't said anything. Manar, you're very quiet. You want to say anything, bud?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the button to work here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add to your sport shooting thing. You know, I'm an advocate for sport shooting.
Absolutely.
I find that sport shooting gives you, besides the practice, the confidence to handle your firearm in a safe manner. And the more you shoot in sports, the more confident you get and the better you get in handling that firearm. As you know, yes, you can practice the wrong thing or somebody could teach you the wrong thing. But if you've gone to a good training program, you would know how to differentiate between right and wrong. But you know, sport shooting definitely assists in giving you that confidence to handle your firearm in terms of movement, reloading, holstering, unholstering, safety, all of those aspects. You know, and especially for beginners. I find that sport shooters tend to help beginners a lot more than walking onto a course and expecting an instructor with a certain level of expertise to teach you the introduction to firearm handling. So in both aspects that you covered already, Dean, in terms of what equipment you should use, what knowledge you should have before you attend a course, which course to choose. Sport shooting helps you in gathering that information.
Thanks, Manar. Yes, you're right. The sport shooting definitely helps. My only thing is with sport shooting is that the choice of the right club and the right environment for that to take place. You might find yourself at a club where you find yourself in the wrong detail and then you're having to race and go a little fast. I think it's about selection of the club and the guys at the club that are there. If they're very helpful, they'll help you down that path, that learning path. And I'm sure you'll agree with me with that.
Dean.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Sorry, just something that you did mention earlier. For example, obviously a newbie question again, but similar in regard to the comments made last about sport shooting. I think from what I've understood you say in regard with sport shooting and training and stuff like that, if you train or you do sport shooting with the gun that you're going to be, or with the firearm that you're going to be carrying every day on a regular basis, that's where it would assist you. But if you have a dedicated sport gun that you only use for sport shooting and you're not going to be carrying it on an everyday basis, it's not assisting you because you're learning or you're perfecting on your sport shooting firearm rather than your EDC firearm.
Okay, Mohammed, I understand what you're saying. Generally, what will happen is a new firearm owner will enter into their sport shooting arena with the firearm that they've bought with the intention of shooting their carry gun or the gun they've just acquired in that area to become a bit more proficient. Where we find some of the sport shooters, they will elevate themselves to a very high level in sport shooting where they are actually able to transition from a highly tuned sport shooting firearm back to a more mundane carry gun where the trigger is not as light. It might be a safe action type pistol. It might not have an external hammer, and they are able to transition between those firearms very quickly because of their level of training or level exposure to sport shooting as well as carry. So what Manar is saying there and what I'm saying is exactly this. If you are a new firearm owner, a very good avenue to become more proficient in and more comfortable and more confident in the use of a firearm is to join a club and participate. My only recommendations are this, that when you do attend a club, be sure to use the equipment that you're going to use when you're initially carrying the gun. Just until you get to the point of where you've elevated yourself, where now you can make that decision that I'm going to participate in sport. This is sporting. I have a sports firearm to cover that. And this is my carry firearm that I do need to practice EDC with. Any other questions,
May
guys?
I add something for a last thought from a lady's point of view,
Yes.
Dean? Not all ladies can carry big firearms. I'm one of them. So I prefer to shoot with my sport CZ because my carry only takes 7 or 8 one up. So that's impractical to use that in your training. Understand? And that would be the reason why we would use, say for instance, your sport weapon.
Okay, Marinda, I hear what you're saying. Just a couple of things that I would like to err you on the side of caution is that I know what firearms you own, and I know the reasons why you've got those and why you choose to carry a specific firearm. What I would recommend is that the courses that I run are not designed for a number of rounds to be fired, not volleys of shots to be fired. They're more about the techniques than the number of rounds fired, if that makes sense. The next thing is that I've had a number of people that have attended my courses with a 5-shot or 6-shot revolver. There's still some people out there that like to carry revolvers, and they attend a course with a 5-shot or 6-shot revolver, or a single stack type pistol that only holds 8 rounds. It just means that you need to become more proficient with the mechanics and the workings of that gun or that system that you've got. And I'm a big advocate that in terms of, for example, let's say now you're going to attend one of my courses, by all means bring both or all your firearms with. And specific segments of the course, run those guns so that you get to know how they both work. I'm sure that at night, when you're at home and the lights go out, you would want to have the best possible advantage on your side. So you might decide to have a high capacity pistol as opposed to a 5-shot revolver. But there are some instances, for example, you mentioned now where a lady cannot carry a big firearm because of, first of all, your size, and you can't conceal the weapon. So you are then forced to carry a smaller weapon, which is more concealable. But you do need to train with that concealable, that weapon that has been purchased for concealment.
Yeah, true.
Any other questions, guys?
No, sir, and thank you very much.
Kurt, got any questions, or you still with us? Khalid, have you got anything that you'd like to add? Shelley and Greg? Okay, guys, if there's nothing else to add, I'd like to say thanks for joining me for the second webinar. I'm going to have a third. I'll let you know. I will be covering in some webinars coming up in the future. I'm going to be covering equipment, an important topic. Equipment's going to need to be broken down into various segments because there's quite a bit of equipment that needs to be covered in terms of what type of training you would like to attend. The other topics that I would like to cover is a topic that I feel probably the most important of all the training you can attend. Without this, all the equipment and all the other training means absolutely nothing, and that is awareness. Very important aspect that I'd like to cover in a webinar on its own. If you're not aware, you can have all the fancy equipment and you can have all the fancy courses, and it means absolutely nothing. You're not even getting out the starting blocks. And then, of course, something that I like to delve into, and I know Rids and I know Steve like to listen to me talk for hours on this, and that is the force continuum and the use of force within the country in we currently live. That's a webinar I would like to have. That's going to be an interesting one that I would like to run as well. So please be on the lookout. I'll email you guys. I'll be on Facebook and I'll advertise when we're going to run again. I've got a little note that was handed to me by the support team behind me, the ladies that are supporting me, that are bringing me my FUNDIKHONO mug full of coffee, as you can see there, FUNDIKHONO full of coffee. Thanks, ladies. I've got a thank you note here to Alex for sharing the link. So Alex, thanks for that, Mr. G. And those of you that want friends to attend webinars like this, please just let them make contact with me so I know who they are. I sometimes just get a name and I don't know who this person is, or sometimes I get a cell phone number coming up and I don't know who they are. I don't know them from a bar. So it's not that I don't want people to join. The more people we can educate the correct way, the better it is for all of us as firearm owners and people who advocate being able to protect ourselves, and not only in South Africa, but in this crazy world in which we're currently living. And yes, the more people that we can get to join these webinars, the better it is for us. A couple of things that I would like to mention, and I think Rids just needs to give me some clarity on this. There's a new gun shop in town, Rids.
Yes, there is. They're having a big launch soon.
The launch is on Monday, I believe, eh?
Yeah, 8th of June.
Okay, guys, be on the lookout. There's a new gun shop in town in Durban. I know some of you are not in Durban. Kurt, sorry, bud, you're down in Cape Town. You're going to be stuck with Alan Marthies at City Guns. Here in Durban, we got a new gun shop opening, owned by Lukman. You'll see Ridwan and I hanging around there quite a bit, as I do all the other shops. But yeah, guys, we need to support local. Local is lekker, eh? Especially when it comes to gear and equipment, Rids. There's a lot of local guys out there that do some really good stuff. Please support our local guys. If it comes to anything local, for example, if you guys want to learn sport shooting, I'll put you in touch with the guys that teach sport shooting. I mean, that's a whole avenue on its own. I don't teach sport shooting, as I also don't teach long range rifle shooting, precision rifle shooting. There are other guys out there that are really good at that. But I want to thank everybody for joining me. Please be on the lookout for those other webinars coming up. If you know guys that have attended courses with me that are maybe not getting onto these, have a chat to them. I mean, we're numbering the numbers here are between 19, they bounce around 19, 20 at a time. Some guys come and they go. I see some of the guys have left already, and I understand that. So please just share, just chat to the guys, but just get them to touch base with me so I know who's going to be on the forum at that specific time. But thanks a lot for sharing your time with me. Time is valuable, and be safe out there. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the range soon. We're going to be running some courses coming up. We're just waiting for the green lights, and then you'll see Rids and I'll be running some stuff in tandem together. So we're just waiting for Rids to get back, my brother to get back from Kimberley, and then we'll be doing the practical stuff. Thanks, guys. We'll catch up with you soon.
Dean, thank you again. Take care, sir. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night,
Mr.
all.
G.